Hello, Senate District 13. Thank you all for joining me. Welcome to my town hall on COP26 and what it means for our future. We have a record turnout, and that shows how much you care about the climate crisis. And that's why I'm honored to serve our region and our state as vice chair of our joint climate change committee, and as well as chair of a new subcommittee on our clean energy future. I had the honor of attending COP26, the United Nations Climate Change Conference, as a member of our California delegation. And today we're going to talk about some of what I learned, what I saw, and the ideas and emerging technologies and things that I want to bring back to help the people of our district. And again, the fact that so many are on here today, I think we had 600, 700 last count, it just shows that you care about this issue. And I'm just really proud of you all, and thank you all for being deeply engaged. This is truly an all hands on deck moment. As you know, I'm deeply passionate about tackling the climate crisis for our state and for our region, and really for my kids and all of our kids and our grandkids. And as you may know, our communities are the most impacted in the state by sea level rise, by the projections. And we've also, of course, all been dealing with wildfire smoke and conserving water for another drought. And probably some of you who have lived here for decades have only recently been buying air conditioners as it's gotten hotter and hotter in our region. And while climate impacts are local, they're shared throughout the world. While I was traveling as part of this trip, I actually went to Portugal first to see floating offshore wind, which is exactly what we're going to need here in California. And all they wanted to do was talk about the wildfires that they had, and very similar to what's happening in California. So whether it's Greece, Portugal, Australia, Ghana, everyone around the world is being impacted by the climate crisis already. And so hopefully that brings us the shared sense of momentum and action. And to solve the climate crisis, to get to zero, which also happens to be the name of the blog on my Senate website, Getting to Zero, if you want our in-depth thoughts on this, we have to remake every aspect of our economy, every aspect, from our transportation to our buildings, to our building materials, to our agriculture, every aspect. So that's why this is the greatest challenge we've ever faced, but also the greatest opportunity that we've ever faced. Today, I'll be joined by some incredible guests. In the second part, we're going to focus on California with my colleague, Senator Lena Gonzalez, who chairs the Transportation Committee. In the first part, talk big picture about COP and the impacts, and answer some of your questions with Dr. Shutta Chakraborty, who is a risk and behavioral scientist and just an incredible speaker and analyst on these issues, and Amy Christensen, founder of Christensen Global, who's been working on these issues for 30 years. I'll give a more full bio of both of them in a moment. I went to COP for two reasons, both to tell the California story and show that it can be done. We have reduced our emissions per capita 20% while growing our economy by 60% here in California, but also to get the best ideas from other states and other countries, because even here in California, we have to move much, much faster to both meet our goals and to do what needs to get done for the rest of the world. Because also in California, we are a source of innovation. The policies that we pass, but also the companies here in our own district, Tesla, who started here, Rivian, Solar City, so many. I remember sitting in 2007 working with Gary Kremen, who is now on our Santa Clara Valley Water District, coming up with the slogan of zero money down solar for clean power finance. So many business model and technology innovations coming out of this region. And so we need to put those policies in place to keep inspiring those innovations that will then help the rest of the world. On to COP. COP26 was incredible. The content, the connections, the hope, just in taking the train and the bus to the conference, you'd meet 10 people. Just never forget, one day I was so tired. I just sat by myself, one of those train kind of four tops with a little table in the middle, and three folks sat down, and I ended up engaging with them, and they were all from Nigeria. And one of them was the environmental minister for Bayelsa, which is a state in the south, which is most impacted by oil spills and oil drilling often by US companies, by the way. Anyway, we engaged. They were so happy to meet me. I was so happy to meet them. One of them was wearing traditional, really African garb, what you think of. And everyone else is bundled up in Scotland. And we got saying, are you warm enough? Do you want my jacket? He said, no, I like the cold. Anyway, just little memories like that were incredible. And I met with US senators like Ed Markey, who I've known for a long time, leaders from other states, business leaders, nonprofit leaders, people I knew from 30 years ago working for the EPA or working for starting clean tech for Obama, people coming together for a shared purpose. And that was really what it was all about. And that's what it's going to take. All sectors, all people working together. Folks have repeatedly asked, how I feel after the climate conference, optimistic or pessimistic? And I'd say I feel encouraged. We accomplished more than was expected, although not more than hoped. I didn't think we'd get the pledges to get to 1.5 degrees, and we'll talk about why that's important. But we really I wanted to see a real sense of shared momentum and shared commitment and real action, not just pledges in the distant future, real action, real momentum. And we'll talk about some of those today, some of the notable progress, the US showing up, unlike in the Trump administration, the global Methane Pledge to reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2030, very significant. The pledge to end deforestation by 2030, 110 countries signing on, including Brazil, Indonesia, Democratic Republic of Congo. That's 85% of the world's forests covered there. The financial industry stepping up, car manufacturers, 11 car makers in 23 countries saying that they will only be doing zero emission vehicles by 2040. So we'll talk about that today with some of our experts here. And while I was not able to get a full Zoom where I can actually see everyone's faces, we don't have that capability. I was not able to work that with the state Senate. We do have an ability, I believe, to ask questions in real time, plus that will go to the panelists. Plus we got questions in advance for many of you, and we'll be focusing on those and working to answer those questions. So let me introduce our first two panelists, Amy Christensen. Amy Christensen has 30 years experience in policy, law, investment, philanthropy, business. She drafted and negotiated the first US bilateral and regional climate change agreements, the agreements with Costa Rica in 1994 to 1997. Also, while she was a student, fellow Stanford Law student, she drafted the first ever university endowment climate investment policy back in 1999. And if we have time, we'll ask her about that. And then as climate maven at Google, she shaped the company's early climate change initiatives. And Google, as you know, is one of the few companies really committed to 24/7 clean energy, which if you followed my legislation is one of the bills that we're working on. As they say, it's going from 100% renewable to 24/7 clean energy is like going from preschool to grad school. So it's a big leap. Anyway, she initiated a lot of those policies there. We also have Dr. Shutta Chakraborty. Dr. Chakraborty is a risk and behavioral scientist whose work is motivated by the need for clear, credible, evidence-based communication to urgently and proactively manage the risks that threaten human security and well-being from climate change, as well as from COVID-19. She's a US president for We Don't Have Time, the world's largest social network and review platform on the climate. And she's really built her career on how to connect science, policy, and communication to change attitudes, empower audiences, and inspire action. Thank you to both of you for being here. So my first question to both of you is, are you more optimistic or pessimistic after COP26?
Shutta, do you want to start?
So we have come a long way from what we anticipated.
We are not where we need to be, but keeping 1.5 degrees as the max temperature warming by the end of the century is still an opportunity. Now it's going to take us actually activating across private and public sectors to see that turn into reality. So I have hope that that is still on the table. Some real concrete things did come out of this COP that I did find very optimistic. One was that, okay, so we know that we need to focus on reducing emissions by 45% by the end of this decade. Fine. But the way we're going to do it, and actually being able to draw that out while diplomats were still together at COP, was what everybody was paying attention to. One of the main components to actually see that become reality is the Methane Pledge. And that was really huge for me. So we had more than 100 countries agree to cut emissions of methane. And we know that methane is a very potent carbon greenhouse gas. And next to carbon, it doesn't stay in the atmosphere as long, and it's more potent than carbon. So if we can actually take that out of the atmosphere, then we can actually potentially reach some of these targets that have come out of COP. And this pledge was pushed by the Biden administration, which then China got behind too. So this is what was really unprecedented, because coming out of the Paris Accords, we really needed to see US and China as the two historic biggest polluting countries come together and lead the charge on all of these pledges. And so China and the US did come together at the end of this to say that they were going to do more to cut emissions this decade. China also committed for the first time to develop a plan to reduce methane. So that to me was one serious takeaway that gives me hope.
Thank you, Amy.
I agree with that. I would say I spent a lot of my time on the outside with the private sector, with investors and businesses. And what was clear is that everyone who was there in Glasgow knew the direction we're going in. They knew they had to make a commitment at a minimum net zero by 2050, whether they were an investor or corporation throughout their operations. That's kind of the minimum expectation at this point. And what gave me hope were the near-term commitments that I started to hear from a number of the investors and the businesses operating globally to ratchet up the speed at which they begin that process of getting to net zero by 2050. I think critical was the sectoral agreement around methane. And I think, Josh, you've been a real leader with your sectoral focus on cement. The first bill to really focus on a key, what they call hard to abate sector, cement, steel. These are tough sectors to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and we need both policy leadership and business leadership. I was on a panel with Liberty Steel, one of the hard to abate sectors at UK steel company, and just an honest conversation about the challenges we're having. But then together, the governments can put the policies in place, the incentives in place, the collaboration around innovation in place to help them go faster at the same time that their shareholders and the businesses themselves work to align their operations toward reducing emissions. What concerned me is that while we made some important advancements there, we're just not aligned as quickly as we need to be to have government leadership like you're showing in California and like California has shown for a long time to help support investors and businesses to move more quickly. We're still losing the narrative battle here and there, where countries are concerned about making commitments at the expense of their economic growth, even though California and others have shown how climate change leadership drives economic growth, job creation, and innovation. And so we're still losing the narrative. We've got to win it, and we need governments to catch up to a lot of the businesses and investors to get the policy signals to help us move as quickly as we need to move. So I had a bit of a half empty, half full takeaway, but overall, I would agree with you that we got had more success, more consensus than I would have thought going in.
Yeah, it's my feeling that we just need enough countries to take action, and I include California in that, as that, we have the 5th largest economy in the world. Although noted, one of the comments from Mark saying California is no longer leading in climate action, others have passed us. I believe that's true, and I believe we need to do more, and we'll address that, Mark. But enough countries and large states taking action that, again, we set that policy framework. And just like we did with solar, where this cost has come down 90% over 10 years, 300% since the mid 70s, that we bring down the cost of all these technologies, like we're working to do with low carbon cement. And so that's going to lift me optimism. We see enough real action by enough countries. We're going to keep making the cost of these technologies cheaper and cheaper and easier to adopt. But again, we need political will, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Amy, just, you and I have worked on these issues for, I think, 15, 20 years together. You've been to 6 COPs, I think. What was different about this COP from others? And was there any of those differences that were, again, really positive for you that helped leave you encouraged?
I think 2 primary takeaways were nature and the private sector. Some people called this the nature COP, and the recognition that nature has a vital role to play, whether it is helping draw down carbon out of the atmosphere, investing in soil health, restoring and protecting blue carbon like mangroves, as well as protecting and restoring our forests, our wetlands, our peat lands. There was a real global effort to focus major additional resources by governments towards the protection of nature, a lot of public-private partnerships to help get that done. And then the private sector with 100 trillion in investor commitments to be aligned with net zero by 2050. And companies just kind of racing against each other to make greater, more accelerated commitments, more accelerated action. The private sector was not an afterthought. The private sector was being featured in the main, in the blue zone, in the official negotiating halls, because the private sector was seen as where the action was. Governments need to set the rules, but the capital that needs to flow, the vast majority, is going to come from the private sector. The changes in the hard to abate sectors, the changes in corporate behavior are going to come from the private sector. So,
as you and I were saying, they want those companies really. They want a price on carbon, right? They want regulation. They want government to.
Yeah, that was definitely everywhere I went. It was just the beginning of almost every conversation. Can we just get a price on carbon? Can we just recognize that this is a pollutant that needs to be priced? And that will give us the kind of signal we need, no matter what form that price on carbon takes. And governments are just still holding back from doing that, even though business and investors, the vast majority, are asking for that clarity of a price on carbon, so they understand those rules and they can move quickly to decarbonize their operations.
Yeah. And of course, we do have a cap and trade system here in California, but the problem is we've had a very low price. It's sort of bounced along historically at $18 a ton. At the bottom of the market, Europe's been at $60 a ton. The good news is we have seen movement in that upwards recently, especially with Washington State taking its action and now wanting to link up with us. So some positives there about cap and trade and the price on carbon in California. Dr. Chakraborty, I want to turn to you for a moment. If I may call you Shutta, I will. I want to talk about the behavioral science, pick up on that Amy mentioned in a moment, because I know that's right in your sweet spot. First, one question from Gladwin. He said, does 1.5 degrees mean we have to be off fossil fuels by 2030? And that's a great question. And so this may be good news to say that, no, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean we have to be off fossil fuels by 2030. What the scientists tell us is that 1.5 degree means reduction about 45 to 50% of greenhouse gases by 2030, and then at zero around 2050. And I do believe California has a chance of achieving that. If we have bold action, we certainly can. Biden announcement is in line with that, although we don't have the policies in place yet at the federal level. Shutta, is that your understanding as well about what we need to get to 1.5 degrees?
Yeah, well, firstly, we need to stop subsidizing the $452 billion a year that we are providing to fossil fuel companies. We're at a deficit. We're not starting at zero. We're starting at a negative. So first, we need to remove that off the table. The International Monetary Fund has a ticker that's showing every single day. It was showing through COP26 how much we were contributing to, how much taxpayers globally were contributing to the continuation of fossil fuels. So that is first and foremost, but the pledges will get us there, but we have to absolutely stop subsidizing fossil fuel industry. So I just want to say before I answer the question that you posed, that I really echo everything Amy said as well. To put some numbers behind it, we saw 33 financial institutions that have 8.7 trillion in assets promised to do this deforestation pledge. I mean, we need the states to set the pledges, and we need those trillions of dollars to come together. That's where the muscle is. That's where the actual collaboration is going to move the needle towards reaching this goal of ending deforestation by 2030. Because I see in this chat, and rightly so, we're going to have 10 billion people on the planet by 2050, and we have a warming planet. The combination of that is making for increased frequency and simultaneous impacts around climate. To veer us off this trajectory, we absolutely need to get everybody on board. And the way to do that through what we know in behavioral science is to tell this narrative in a way that the end recipient will interpret it and not just, drop the numbers and the science and the facts. We as human beings we don't know the difference between 10 billion and 100 million. It's not, these numbers don't mean anything to us. Our brains don't process them. So we need to actually present the information in a way that is interpreted accurately, and we see actual behavioral outcomes that support these pledges. And as individuals, we can do that. And of course, as the private sector, we can collaborate, bring in some real muscle to actually see through these pledges into reality.
That's great. And that Charlie had just asked that in the chat about getting all countries to give subsidies of fossil fuel companies to stop. And I think you and I were saying it's about 452
billion.
$452 billion in fossil fuel subsidies. What universe is that? That was focused on, that's
annually.
But that's globally. Worldwide? That's worldwide?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, $452 billion in subsidies, and a lot of those are coming in our own country. Ronan asked about aggressively achieving movement on converting state and local government vehicle fleets to electric. We'll talk about that in the California section. But when I gave my event, I had my event at COP, by the way, and I was wearing the same, my new clothes since my luggage was lost. And I appreciate folks who wait on them that this is actually my dinosaur tie, because if we don't act, we are going to end up like the dinosaurs. I was reading Bill Gates' book this morning. I stat actually hit home to me that I'm sure I saw in this way. At the time of the dinosaurs, when you had crocodiles living above the Arctic Circle, it was only 4 degrees warmer than it is today. So anyway, hence the tie here. But we'll talk about that. I did. One of the things that I think we need to do is for the California government to get to net zero by 2035. If we're going to ask the whole state to get there by 2045, we need the state to lead the way. And by purchasing these new technologies, we will buy down the cost for everyone else. So keep these questions coming. One question says, will ending subsidies on fossil fuels lead to increased gas prices? If so, how do we convince Republicans and everyday Americans that this is a good idea? That was from Wendy. And Shuta, let me turn this back over to you, because again, you talked a little bit about behavioral science, but we were talking in advance, and this is, again, the topic of a lot of your writing and study. It's just the difference between people's sort of perceptions of the climate crisis and then their actions. Why, can they feel this is coming and then act in a very different way? Can you talk about that again?
I'm going to keep it really simple. I promise not to get all too down a science rabbit hole here, but our brains are wired in a certain way. We are wired to react to the risks that are immediately in front of us. And that makes sense because our ancestors would see a snake and it would jumpstart that fight or flight response system and they would run away. And we should be really thankful for that. It's why we exist today. So it's good that we have these snap judgments. But what's bad about that is climate change, what we're facing right now, how complex and how interconnected, how massive of a global risk this is actually, our brains aren't designed to respond to it. And when things are overwhelming us cognitively, we tend to turn off. And the more immediate risk, again, this is how we're wired, the more immediate risk is, I'm not gonna have, the gas prices are gonna go up, or this is gonna be a cost that I can't afford. And so we have to be compassionate of that. We have to stop othering those who are nervous about the immediate impact on them and their families, because ultimately it's how we are wired. And there are pre-existing beliefs that exist in different demographics that we need to take into account. It is insane that we know that just based on somebody's political identity, whether or not they will support climate action, whether or not they will support wearing a mask. So the fact that we can correlate these different perceptions means that there's deep identity roots to some of these things. So we need to recognize that, we need to be compassionate, and then we need to communicate in a way that acknowledges that fear, that risk perception that I don't want to give something up right now, even if it means saving the world ultimately. So how do we communicate the benefits? How do we actually say, yes, there's an upfront cost right now, but it's actually cheaper overall. It's going to be much more cost effective to put up, again, that 100 million versus 100 billion. People can't tell the difference, but it's cheaper to put up $100 million now than 100 billion in relief and recovery after the wildfire season, after the hurricanes all hit the US simultaneously. So it's how we frame it, it's how we communicate it compassionately, and it's recognizing the way that our brains are wired to want to ignore seemingly slow-moving, far-away risks. But also we can override that. We can override that through good, solid communication and compassion, understanding that we're potentially attacking people's very identities, and that's against our survival instinct.
I was just going to say, although I grew up in the Bay Area, I moved to Idaho when I was 13. So just offering a little lens from a red state, a more conservative state, a lot of ranchers. There are 160,000 people in line for the all-electric Ford F-150. And full disclosure, I'm an advisor to Ford on their work, on their decarbonization, and on their switch to electrification production of EVs. But there are 160,000 people waiting for that all-electric 150. And one of the reasons why is because it provides backup in the case of a power outage. As someone who lives on the edge of the grid, where I'm in Idaho, very snowy, we've had 24-hour power outages in the heart of the winter. And so people, when we start, so Doctor, you bring the science, the behavioral science to it, and I'll bring the anecdotes of the experience of saying, actually, these provide multiple benefits in addition to being able to keep a vulnerable person warm in your car because you can keep it running in the winter without polluting, all the way to being able to charge your ranch equipment that is now increasingly electrified on your Ford F-150, or a lot of ranchers I know want an F-250. And so I think the benefits, so as we make this transition, yes, have the compassion about the narrative, but also get excited about the upside of this electrification of transportation and what it means to the functionality and better lives, healthier, cleaner air in the winter. So, and then for people who, have to do their jobs, all the utility that an electrified fleet can bring. And that's why, and the reason why a lot of corporations are rapidly moving to electrify their automotive fleets is because of the functionality, but also the maintenance costs. As you said, the total cost of ownership of the electric vehicles are far often, most of the time, far less than a gas car because of maintenance and fuel costs. Here in Idaho, I have some of the cheapest rates in the nation, and it's a third of the price to drive an electric car than it is an internal combustion engine. So it's the compassion, but also getting the facts and just getting the experience out there as quickly as we can. Hopefully people we can support this transition for those who may need support in accessing these advanced technologies and making them cost effective. California has a lot of bills that support that. I know there's some threats to that right now, but also let's get them out there as quickly as possible so people can have less of that fear triggered and potentially, hopefully, some more excitement.
Well, that's great. I know, and when we talked to Senator Gonzalez, chair of the Transportation Committee, that's some of the music to her ears, and we'll engage more on transportation. So thank you for that. And that gains Evan's question, I think, was along those lines, Ariane. So a lot of people were interested in that topic. One of the questions from Diane in Sunnyvale, she said, what are the most exciting technology developments in the work to help address the climate crisis? And I'll speak for a moment here. There's a lot of innovation going on. And again, we need to create the policy environment where people want to buy these new green products or technologies. Again, that's why we propose the government itself be, by the state, carbon neutral by 2035, because we're then going to be buying for our 50,000 fleet by electric vehicles. We'll be getting our buildings electrified, which is going to, again, bring down the cost for everyone else. Let's take cement. Cement, if it was a country, would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases. And that's where we passed a bill I led this year to get to, that Amy referred to get to net zero. The first time we've actually established net zero for any sector in California, the first time that we've that any bill has targeted that sector directly. So we've targeted to get to net zero. And again, that's all about helping these innovations. Many, many people now working on low carbon cement. And this bill will encourage that with regulatory push. But then we also have to work on the demand pull side of that as well to make sure the state, which buys 40% of the concrete, again, cement is sort of the flour and the cake of concrete, that state is buying that low carbon concrete. There's a really interesting session at COP on sustainable aviation fuel. There's a commitment to produce 45 gigawatts of hydrogen electrolyzers annually by the end of the decade, which would drive down the cost of green hydrogen and put hydrogen into reasonably cost competitive, and that the DOE is pursuing with their hydrogen shot to get green hydrogen to $1 a kilogram. So those are some of the things that I saw there and took back. And what for both of you, were there other technologies or things that you saw that were really exciting in that sphere?
Go for it, Amy.
So I get most excited, quite honestly, about the farm and food and ag sector and what we can do to transform food and agriculture, whether it's improving soil health, which has these co-benefits to increase both the resilience of crops in times of drought. When you have greater soil health, you have more carbon in the soil, sequestering carbon, and you have increased productivity of crops. And so the science around soil health and the win-win-win aspects of both mitigating climate change by absorbing carbon and by making the crops more resilient in times of drought by holding on to the water, I think is incredibly exciting. And these technologies are not super advanced, right? They're ready to go. They're ready. These are practices and technologies, and we need some transition finance. And so I get excited about the fact that some of the major buyers of agricultural crops, from Anheuser-Busch InBev to General Mills, are saying, we want our farmers producing regeneratively grown oats or hops and barley, and therefore we're going to do a long-term offtake contract from our farmers for that regeneratively grown crop. And now we have private investors coming in to give low interest loans to help the farmers make that transition, to buy the crimpers and the no-till drillers. You can tell I live in a farming state, to help them make that transition and to increase the soil health and keep the soil on land. As we know, the UNFA Food and Agriculture Organization has said maybe 60 cycles of soil left based upon our current just continued depletion. Some people argue that number, but regardless, we need to increase soil health because it is such a powerful tool. So I get really excited about that as far as, yes, there are technologies that add microbes to the soil, but there's also just some pretty low-tech innovations and maybe even remembering back to how we used to do things, less mechanized, more intelligent, and more sustainable, that I'm excited about in the food and ag sector. And then food tech is incredibly exciting, whether it's alternatives, new protein alternatives to help dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions from our consumption of protein. There's so much to go there. I could go on and on. So I'll turn it over to Shata to
That's great. And Shata, I might ask you if you comment on that, please do. But also in the interest of time, we're going to start wrapping up this part. And Lugene just asked, is there any discussion about countries that, getting so many questions in, it's bouncing around. Let me see, one second. Said, is there any discussion about the countries that depend on fossil fuels to drive their economies? How do we get them on board with this program? And Anna from Redwood City had asked, is there a better plan for obliging companies to meet the climate goals they've set out for themselves? So you and I were also talking earlier about 16 countries that have fulfilled net zero with legal systems. Again, the US is not one of those, but I was hoping you could also address that before we sign off, about obliging countries to meet the climate goals they've set up.
Yeah, sure. I really do think COP26 overall was positive and it was moving the needle forward. That being said, one of the things that was missing was the deal didn't include a fund for loss and damage. So even if the world stops emitting greenhouse gases completely today, there's still irreversible effects of climate change. So we know this. And these unavoidable effects are known as loss and damage. And as of right now, COP26 is talking about discussing this. But what did come out of it is a $100 billion commitment to help countries transition to clean energy. And so the US is contributing $3 billion to that pot annually. And so that is really positive to help these countries make that transition. The ones that are dependent on these dirty fossil fuels can actually get the support that they need to make this transition. It's not enough. I mean, countries are really, their entire sovereignty is at risk here. Some of these barrier island states and those in the Pacific that are already experiencing sea level rise and displacement of people, those are impacts that are already underway that we absolutely need to support and we need to prevent from getting any worse. So there needs to be a lot more support for countries that are already experiencing impacts of climate. But at the same time, the funding is there to help the countries that are reliant on fossil fuels. But again, we need more. We need more to help support these countries. And then the countries that have systems that are binding them to their pledges are Sweden, for example, the UK, for example. And it's only 16 countries out of all the countries that have put formal pledges forward, which we've referred to as nationally determined contributions. What is actually holding governments accountable? Well, within countries, there are legal systems in place that are doing that for certain countries, but not nearly all the countries. And we need that beyond just pure pressure. So right now to get like a Russia to really follow through, to get China to follow through. China needs to follow through purely for its survival. But there are certain countries geographically that are not going to get the impacts quite as quickly as other countries. And so places like Saudi Arabia, places like Russia we can put global pressure to see these pledges actually turn into reality. And then we can go a step further using Sweden or the UK as an example to showcase how countries can hold themselves accountable through legal instruments.
Excellent. And I'll mention one other related to that is border carbon adjustments. And in our cement bill, we said, hey, we want to protect industries in California from, we don't want to just regulate them and then bring in cement produced with coal someplace else. So we have this notion of a border carbon adjustment. It's the first time we'll be able to do that. And when I was in Europe, I was on a panel with Europe's head of this border carbon adjustment mechanism. And by having border carbon adjustments, in effect, it's a carbon tax on those countries in China and Russia, because either we're going to collect the money, you're saying, hey, with this carbon tax, we're going to collect the money, or you'll collect the money with your own carbon tax. So I think that is another positive step. Well, I want to thank both of you for joining me. This was wonderful. And I really appreciate you sharing your energy and expertise with us. And we have a lot of favorable comments in the chat. So thank you, and look forward to catching up more in the future.
Thanks, Josh. One last thing I'd mention is take a look at the fossil fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. It's a pretty exciting activist-driven development to get countries to work together to phase out fossil fuels. So I just want to point that out. Great TED Talk. And as we work together to make this transition, it provides a framework for us to consider. So thank you so much for having us.
I'll just say last thing for you, Avi. It reminds me, when we started Clean Tech for Obama, we talked about the political environment. We got a lot of questions about political will. Are you optimistic, say at a national level, and we'll talk in a moment in California with Senator Gonzalez, are you optimistic at a national level about more political will?
We have to prove what I was saying before. We have to show this is a better future, that it's accessible, that it creates higher quality jobs with greater incomes, and that everyone can be part of this better transition. And, Ford just invested $11 billion in Kentucky and Tennessee, not to kind of flog the fact that I'm working with them, but that's what we need more of, right? We need the private sector investing and deploying the clean energy future everywhere. California, yes, continue to be that leading model. Go into states across the nation, in the South. Let's help change the narrative that Shita knows so well. Let's change the narrative concretely by showing the upside of this clean future.
Excellent. All right, thank you to both of you. I'm going to ask Senator Gonzalez to join us here. There she is.
Hi there. Hi, Senator Becker.
If we can highlight her, thank you. Senator Gonzalez is an amazing rising superstar in the state Senate, really just proud and grateful to have her as a colleague. She is chair of the Transportation Committee, obviously vital for the state as well as for our region. And she was also chaired in 2020 the bipartisan committee, subcommittee on pandemic emergency response. She's also a majority whip in the state Senate, so she makes sure that our vote counts add up and that we get what we need to do to get things done. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And hi, everybody. Glad to participate, especially coming off the heels of COP26. So thanks so much for the invitation, my friend.
So you were leading in so many issues from broadband, which is just, again, just I have such respect for what you accomplished there. We'll have $6 billion in broadband, which means so much to areas of my district that actually have been really suffering. I've got a panel on that later today, but on and energy as well. Can you maybe first give any high-level takeaways that you had from COP and whether this left you more optimistic or pessimistic after being there?
Yeah, thanks. First and foremost, thanks so much for the invitation. I think you came into the Senate with, just running and into the climate change space. So I want to thank you as well for your leadership and being such a great colleague on many of these issues that we've put forward together. So thank you. So COP26 for me, this was my first COP, and being a senator who represents one of the largest ports, Port of Long Beach, being the chair of transportation, the first Latina chair of transportation, and the first woman in 20 years, having a district that actually has deep environmental injustice impacts. We've got exide in our backyard, soil and water contamination. We've got diesel trucks going in and out of our port, thousands in droves coming in and out through the 710 communities into the Inland Empire and through many of your communities as well. I felt like even an indelible, responsibility to do more and to bring back a lot of homework from COP26. So that's exactly what we did. I felt really, being there for the first time, talking to international leaders about not just about what we're doing in California, because many of them seemingly knew, but listening to what they were doing in terms of collaboration, in terms of a green economy and workforce, in terms of continuing their hopefully, carbon neutrality and negative space to the 2030. They're even trying to, supersede many of our goals, which I think is wonderful, especially in transportation. Talking about the issue of equity left me really, really compelled to do more work. And I know that with your leadership and with mine and with many of our colleagues, we have a lot of work to do. We've got bold leadership to tackle in the 2022 legislative session. So short answer is I left really inspired, really encouraged, but knowing that we've got a lot of work to do. So thank you for this forum.
Excellent. I have, Valeria, if you could bring up our donut slide just for a moment, kind of perspective on California's emissions. And obviously we're not going to go through all this today, but it's important because what we'll talk about, since Senator Gonzalez chairs transportation, 50% of our emissions are from transportation, that 40% there you see in blue, and then 10% of that industrial is actually from transportation. So it's the biggest area to tackle. Again, just to refresh people, electricity is about 15% of our GHG emissions, and I'm working on that. We have a new version of this 24/7 clean energy bill that I referred to earlier. We'll be working on that. Buildings, of course, is about 10%. And then ag, as Amy talked a lot about, is a big part, and other industrial. So we can switch back now from that. I just wanted to show that, again, I always try to keep in mind the big picture, where are emissions actually coming from? So Senator Gonzalez, since 50% is transportation, what ideas or what things are you excited about in terms of reducing our emissions from the transportation sector?
Yeah, so having, again, one of the largest ports in the nation, coupled with Port of Los Angeles, Governor Newsom was just here yesterday. We were touring Port of Long Beach and Los Angeles, not just on the congestion, like logistical business operation standpoint, but from the reducing emissions standpoint. And so when we think about transportation, oftentimes we've thought about like light duty vehicles, but now we've really started to think about more so medium heavy duty space. And especially because that's the bulk of where the emissions are coming from in the medium heavy duty space. most of our, 80% of our fleet in the port is diesel. So these are folks, near in my community, inhaling diesel particulate matter, nitrogen oxide, sulfur oxide, not just from the trucks, but also from the idling ships. We have about 70 idling ships in the ports of Long Beach and LA at this moment. So being able to transition these owners, these business owners, from diesel over to battery electric and to hydrogen fuel cell is really a priority that I'm looking to tackle next year, and ensuring that is front and center. What makes it a little bit more complicated is a lot of these small business owners are misclassified, so there's issues around that. But nonetheless, we've got to get them transferred over. These incentives from our California, incentive programs have to be equitable to ensure that we're tackling medium heavy duty first. The second thing is also ensuring that our clean transportation program is modernized as well. We have in the light duty space, we've got clean transportation programs like the Clean Cars for All that retire old and polluting vehicles to newer vehicles, and especially focusing on lower income communities, which often are communities of color. I think is a wonderful program. It just needs more of a reach. We need to do more education and uplift the marketing campaign on that. And I believe the Newsom administration allocated a few hundred, about $40 million for a marketing campaign on many of these incentive programs. But we also have like a clean vehicle rebate project and program. And those programs allow for battery electric and also plug-in hybrid. But again, we need to do more work. I mean, just in my district alone, which is some of the most impoverished communities, only $8 million of rebates have been allotted, whereas other areas have received nearly, $12 million or $54 million. So we've got to do a lot more work in ensuring that the communities of color are not left behind in these discussions when we talk about transportation equity.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one of the things that we worked on last year, the budget putting $3.9 billion into charging stations, we need to make sure that charging infrastructure is evenly distributed, or that actually more of it goes to lower income communities, because right now there's much lower rates of adoption for EVs. Sven asked about building codes. If we're going to get to 100% EVs, why won't we support more aggressive building codes on multifamily? And I know we did, and you did a lot of lobbying with the Energy Commission. We definitely got those upgraded, and thanks to Sven and others locally who really led that push. But that's another area. I think when we talk about policy innovation, I just want to mention this innovation that we need to do at the state level, but also the local level. I met yesterday with the leaders of our CCAs, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and folks from Peninsula Clean Energy, and just to hear the programs that they're experimenting with. And they really believe that they can get to a model where we can have charging at every multifamily unit. We can take these models and take them up to the state level. But thank you for your advocacy on those areas. Absolutely. We're not going to reach our goals unless we both, as you said, get the biggest polluters, target the biggest polluters and help them make the transition, as well as make sure there's charging infrastructure, say, in multifamily buildings, right? And in all areas, so people can adopt. There's a number of questions on that. I'm going to turn back to some of the questions that were submitted earlier. And I've got that in a minute.
These are all great questions. Wow.
Yeah, if you see anyone you want to just jump on. I mean, again, you are ports is right in your sweet spot. Someone also said, Carl, what is California doing to relieve the supply chain deadlock and end waste of container ships idling offshore congested ports? Any quick thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we are doing a lot. As mentioned, we just had a hearing 2 weeks ago with my assembly colleague, Patrick O'Donnell. He and I both chaired the Select Committee on Ports and Goods Movement. We just had the governor here yesterday. We've been both at our state, our Secretary of Transportation, and GoBiz, Dee Dee Myers, have both been advocating full force at the federal level. And it's enabled us to see a $17 billion earmark at the federal level for ports, which is unprecedented. This has never happened before. We have antiquated technology that needs to be zero emission. We've got antiquated roads and highways that need to be also have charging infrastructure on them for drayage electrification and for long haul electrification. So we've got a lot of work to do. The silver lining is that even though we have the 70 ships idling, it really gives us an opportunity to start pushing, not just on the governmental level for this $17 billion, most of it hopefully will come to California, but also to push our retailers to do more. Our retailers are now starting to see the corporate responsibility aspect where they're calling for campaigns like Ship at Zero, like an Amazon and Walmart, being able to ensure that they have more infrastructure for what's called shore power to ensure that there's landside electrification for the diesel, for the electrified ships and ships that are hopefully going to go zero emission. So there's a lot of investment, a lot of support now for speeding up the emission reductions at our ports. Of course, declogging the congestion, of course, just at our port communities, because many of our communities are seeing containers on their streets. But the state is working very collaboratively with the federal government, not just on the dollars, but also looking for ways to build more opportunity for, again, bringing retailers and shippers in for container fees if they have containers that are dwelling longer than 9 to 10 days, which also creates idling ships. You know, they're getting those dollars to be able to reinvest back into zero emission technology. So there's a lot being done at this time. I'm hopeful that we will get to see more of a decline in our ships idling and reduce the emissions sooner than later. It's expected that the second quarter of next year, we'll start to see a real decrease, but we're hoping sooner than that with many of these innovations in place and dollars. Yeah.
I also want to thank you for your leadership on public transportation and the fact that you and the Assembly Chair, Laura Friedman, came and did a 3-day, plus tour in the Bay Area, riding all the local transit, including, with me on the Caltrain. And we've talked a lot about Caltrain grade separations, and that's sort of an area certainly I'm advocating for our region, because we're electrifying Caltrain, which is great, as you know, and that's going to be a tremendous benefit. But we won't really, and that'll let us some longer trains and more frequent trains, but we don't get those benefits unless we put in grade separations to otherwise we just the gate downtimes will be really tremendous at our already clogged communities. So anyway, I really appreciate you for doing that and your support of regional transportation.
It was great. I will tell you one thing, Senator Becker, is that going out of Los Angeles, because we often think LA, being in the Bay Area and seeing the incredible regional collaboration at all levels of government, I thought everyone seemed to be in sync with what the needs were in transit, and Caltrain and all of your different regional transportation agencies, I thought was really something for Los Angeles to learn from. So I just want to say thank you so much for the invitation. And I look forward to going back and actually seeing, a lot of your investments see its full potential and getting folks to get back on transit and feel safe again.
Yeah. And I think you could say it's about 1:15. So we're going to keep this going. I know we still have many folks online here. And then I may stick around to a few more questions. We have so many questions. It's going to be hard to get to all of them. There was one about electrifying school buses. I just wanted to mention, this was actually in the Bush administration. We had Republican legislature. We got money for something called the Freedom Prize. It was all about, we had to frame it to talk about narrative. We had to talk about its freedom from oil and from imported oil. And so we were able to get money at that time. And one of the things we wanted to work on was electrifying school buses, right, which are diesel and polluting our neighborhoods. Any quick thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's at the forefront. I mean, we've allocated, I think it's about a couple $2 billion for the electrification, of course, of medium heavy duty and also electrifying school buses, especially in rural communities, which I think is really important. And this mirrors off of the Build Back Better plan, But really, California has really wanted to dig in on electrifying school buses and ensuring that kids at the end of the day are protected. So that is a mainstay. It will continue, and I hope to see more, even more investment in our budget next year, as we potentially will have a surplus, which is good.
Great. I want to get some other big picture questions, a few other specific questions. Somebody asked here in the chat, Roger, what is the single program did you learn about a COP26 that we're not doing here in California? I might mention offshore wind. I talked about it a little bit earlier, but offshore wind is, the reason it's really important is that solar is so cheap, again, because we brought down the cost of solar. Onshore wind is getting cheaper and cheaper, but we need things that are not correlated with them. We need to tackle the peak, especially from 4 to 9 in the winter when the sun goes down and the wind's not blowing as much. We're using 80 to 90% fossil fuels. So that is really an area we need to tackle in California. The great thing about offshore wind is it's perfectly correlated to it. Basically, it is very powerful when the energy from the sun and onshore wind is going down, and so that's what would be really important. So it's great to be out there and to physically see that. But right now, it's not slated to be here till say 2029, and we need to do everything we can to speed that up. Which is one of the other questions was around transmission, and why is that important? It's because right now we can produce more clean energy, but we need to get it to where it needs to be. And that's why at the COP, I talked about build clean faster. We got to find ways in California to build that kind of transmission faster, and we can help speed the way for onshore wind. So that's one thing that I had. What about you? You also mentioned the skills piece, right? Because a big part of this is going to be, people talk about just transition, but a lot of it is really the workforce. So can you talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me at COP26, I had the opportunity, our Senate delegation had the opportunity to sit down with the Scottish Parliament. And in speaking with one of the ministers there, she was incredibly well-versed. She came from Aberdeen, which was the northeastern part of Scotland, where a lot of the oil and gas jobs currently exist. And so it kind of spoke to me because that is Long Beach. And we are trying to not just do this at the state level, but Long Beach is trying to figure out how to kind of move forward above and beyond just oil and gas revenues and look towards renewables as well. And so she talked about the skills passport, where a lot of their oil and gas workforce were going through this sort of assessment where in this new economy that they're creating, of course, towards wind and solar and all of the renewable space, that they're looking at how they can transfer skills. And so they've allotted a certain amount of employees at it's a specific company, and they've said, 60% of their skills can transfer into this new green economy. That 40% that cannot transfer, if they need certifications for that, they've also established a training fund to be able to pay for those skills that they need in order to upskill them to this green new economy. And I think it was a really mindful approach on how to embed the workforce in these conversations. And it really, provided a great opportunity for California to start looking at ways in which we can start looking at this just transition. So that was one thing I really took away, just given, we can talk a lot about, what goals we want to hit at certain points, but we have to bring the workforce with us. And so that's something I know I'll be digging into next year in terms of legislation and talking to our local trades, women and men about, how we can bring them along in these discussions.
Awesome. One question Suzanne and San Mateo asked, she said, this is part of a little of the global conversation, but it gets to California too. How are needed changes going to be paid for with our current system to meet the goals set in COP26? So I think part of that is the answer that Shutta talked about, paying less developed countries. So again, the commitment was $100 billion a year. Now, again, that was a commitment from Paris that was not executed on. So people recommitted to that with I said they're going to find increasing money for that. But that is a pledge that we absolutely have to make sure that the U.S. adheres to and other countries do. But the other part, I think, is, again, it gets back to really putting a price on carbon, right? It's the most important thing so that polluters pay. And to do two things, push polluters in the right direction with the tax to use the money to make the transition, And again, we say tax, we have a cap and trade system here, but we need to make that price, at the painful the level to push them in the right direction. But then we also have to mobilize lots of private capital. And I think that was also part of the discussion, and Amy talked on this a little bit. How can we use public money to kind of crowd in private capital to either provide financing or loan guarantees to fund a green project? So looking at California increasing our use of green bonds, the notion of a green bank that we're working on. Of course, Build Back Better also has a green bank piece into it. But I think that's some of my thoughts in terms of financing this. And again, I think it's all about that narrative too, that Shutta talked about, that it's not, narrative is right now framed in terms of costs. It has to be really in terms of opportunity. And that ultimately is cheaper to do this overhaul of our economy rather than pay the cost of just the hard cost of energy long term, or the let alone the repercussions of climate change. Any thoughts on any of that, Lena?
I think you said that perfectly. I think what we learned from COP26 as well, as we mentioned, was this sort of air of corporate responsibility. I mean, coming from, used to work at Microsoft in my former days, and coming from this space where we know that corporate responsibility has been it was sort of front and center at COP26, and everyone can take that as they may, but there is more that this private sector should do with government, and that's what we saw. I saw that front and center as well in Scotland, just on the skills passport discussion. That industry had to work very closely with our governments, as well as they even incorporated academic institutions to do a lot of the reporting out on skills and on the reduction of emissions that needed to be done, not just by the government, but by the private sector. So I think all of that to say that we've got a lot to do in this space, but collaboration needs to be at the forefront in all of this. So I think you said it perfectly, Senator Becker.
Thank you. We've got a few questions here. A number of questions about Diablo Canyon and nuclear. I mean, personally, I've been supportive of next generation nuclear. I've not heard a lot of conversation about keeping Diablo open. I don't know if you have. One thing we were very active with our office, was writing letters to the CPUC saying that change is supposed to be covered with clean energy. And we needed much more aggressive goals if that were to happen. And the CPUC did respond, mandating 11.5 gigawatts of new capacity. So that was one piece that happened on that. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. But Janelle London, my friend, who runs an incredible nonprofit called Cultura. In fact, you have her book, the children's book about that. She asked about focusing on getting the biggest gasoline users to make the switch first. And we talked about that a little bit earlier. And, when I worked on cash for clunkers at the national level, people sort of poo-pooed cash for clunkers, but really getting the most polluting vehicles off the road is just critically important in terms of bang for the buck. And you already talked about the ports and that pollution.
Yes. Most definitely. I think, again, equity needs to be at the forefront. I can't stress that enough, is that if we want everyone to make that transition to zero emission, we have to look at our lower income communities that, need the help. They need the education and understanding how to get to that transition. And also, we're California, we're the 5th largest economy. We can work binationally, like we worked with Mexico delegation. There are some influences from other countries that we can utilize and tap into to start influencing certain cultures here in our state to be able to make that transition. So I think COP26 allowed us to start thinking a little bit more broadly about the collaborations, either interstate or globally with other countries to help us make those transitions and market the zero emission future.
Were there any other technologies that you saw at COP26 that were exciting?
Technologies, I think, again, learning about Scotland's sort of push for renewables. We heard a lot about the Humber hydrogen plant, a network of hydrogen sort of this space. Of course, they're looking at, I'm just discussing what I've seen, but Humber is not like a hydrogen network that would be near the port, which was very interesting to me. Sorry, I'm getting off of the video now. But Humber was this hydrogen network that will be changed from blue to green hydrogen, sort of this transportation space that they're looking at. And they're really investing deeply, again, with the private sector and academic institutions. They are lockstep for these major multi-billion-dollar investments to happen. So I think it's an opportunity for us to sit back, and I'm doing a lot of research on the weekends, like looking at all of this and seeing what role everyone plays to really be able to bring some good innovation here to California on the transportation side.
And speaking of all of that, we're now joined by our majority leader, Senator Bob Hertzberg. I invited Senator Hertzberg in an important lunch, but he agreed to join if he could at the end. And so we're going to stick around a little bit. And Senator Hertzberg, maybe you could share with us what were some of your key observations from COP, and what are some of your key takeaways?
Well, if I can just chime in on, I just joined about 5 minutes ago. I'm sitting here at the Waldorf Astoria after having lunch with folks and former Governor Davis, which was kind of good. And so I appreciate you including me and allowing me to come in late. But, you mentioned cash for clunkers, and Senator Gonzalez mentioned equity. Well, one of the things that we can do, one of the challenges that we face as we're trying to go electric with transportation is that people without means don't get cars. You got to be a rich person to get a Tesla, right? Maybe we do a cash for clunkers and do trade-in for electric cars so that we, in fact, democratize this whole effort in terms of tailpipe emissions. It doesn't just include certain folks and what that does. There's a number of ideas. But look, here's my takeaway. I've been doing this stuff. I left the government after being speaker for 12 years, traveling the world, doing nothing but working on this space and all over the planet. In my company in South Los Angeles on Martin Luther King Boulevard and Alameda, I used to call it, where opportunity meant social justice. And I found, going to your point, Senator Becker, about the private sector side, I come out of being speaker during the energy crisis and totally focused on a revolution. We got to change this. We got to do something. I go to South LA, I start this company, and I'm telling you, I had to perjure myself to sign all the documents necessary to sign. All the various incentive programs were ridiculous. And the core issues of any business were two things. One, financing. How do I get a bank to finance my technology? Does it work? How long does it last? Does it have risk? And how do I get insurance? Right? Things that you don't normally think about in our policy, in our sector, but were fundamentally important in terms of the transition. And so as I traveled around the world, I took that company public in the UK. I went overseas and did a ton of stuff all over the world. And I went to COP with me and Senator Wachowski, who was with us, went to COP in Poland during the previous federal administration, and there were no Americans. Senator Wachowski and I were it. And so I think that there were a number of takeaways, right? Takeaway number one is, as crazy as it sounds for us who are believers, there is finally a realization that extreme weather and stuff that's going on in the news every day has a correlation to this highbrow stuff that we environmentalists think about. Two, the impact on extreme heat to people in the communities and all of that stuff. I think that as much as we have to pause for a moment and just accept that this thing's finally getting real. This is not just Al Gore standing on a deal in front of a big display. It's really become a much more real thing. And it is number one. Two, there was extraordinary energy that I've never seen across the place because the United States was so representative. The federal government, number of states, we were there with the governor of Illinois, the governor of Hawaii, all over the place, plus our legislative delegations, as Senator Gonzalez said, Mexico wanting to meet with us and kind of the issues that were there. And again, that becomes the stuff, the material from which you then can move forward on public policy. We met with somebody, Adelina and I, Senator Gonzalez and I, who are doing airplane fuels, renewable airplane fuels. And there's really a significant shift in cost of renewables and how we, as you suggested, Senator Becker, we make this shift in our economy. So I really do think the president uses this term all the time, inflection point, and I think we're there. I see the private sector engaged. I think we have to be, as policymakers, I see California as having this extraordinary brand that I think that we haven't done a great job with in the last 20 years or so, but we are now. And I'm really hopeful that next year, the takeaways that we came and the energy and the connective tissue among all of us as part of this effort to deal with these issues informs a really elegant and aggressive and thoughtful agenda. Because, you know, what's really clear to me, I'm going to be hosting the Majority Leaders Conference here in California in probably July, that how many other states follow us? It's really quite impactful, and other countries. And so this point that Senator Gonzalez was making about those relationships are critical. So the extent we can get out there, I really think we're at an inflection point. I'm ecstatic that I went. I've been to so many of these things over the years, and I'm like, I've had another one of these things. Who wants to go to this thing? But I think it really was an inflection point. I think it really was important, both for us internally and I think across the board. So sorry for the long explanation, but you know, this is informed by 35 years of work in this space, and I'm just really excited about pricing and costs and capital. We saw Senator Murkowski sent me an article where capital in the fossil fuel areas being harder and more costly to come by, when in fact there's more capital in the renewable space, and that stuff's really happening because it used to be just a couple of CEOs and a couple of politicians trying to do demonstration projects, but now the depth and dimension of where we are, I think, will inform capital, and we have to just make sure that we're not a bunch of bozos as public policy makers. That's a defined term of public policy, and really get it right and really be smart about it. So Becker, work your butt off. We're relying on you.
Senator Gonzalez, I know you need to head off. Do you want any final comments? We'll stick around for a little bit.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks again. I did see here in the chat, and I'm thanking everyone for the engagement on the, you know, we don't want to be all talk anymore. I think, you know, being in the legislature for 2.5 years, I think it's important that we create bold action, and that's exactly what we're here to do. I specifically, and I know my colleagues have as well, went to COP26 with the intention of coming back with some homework and actually getting some bold legislation done. As it pertains, you know, many of us have a lot of different interests, which is really unique. I know Senator Becker has worked on a lot of clean energy and cement, reduction of emissions in the cement space. Senator Hertzberg has worked on a lot of various policies as well as it pertains to clean energy and investment and finance in that space. And I am now very much interested in transportation equity and of course the port supply chain and reducing emissions there. So know that we each have sort of our space that we're working on, but very, very much committed. One thing that I will have to say in Los Angeles, I think is seeing this quite extensively, especially in the LA Times, is extreme heat. And I know our colleagues in Assembly Member Luz Rivas has been working on this, our insurance commissioner, Ricardo Lara. We know that extreme heat, and it's been brought up in the comment section, is something that we need to tackle. It can't just be the warning signs, but we've got to actually tackle this. As you know, I talked about today in the Climate Center, you know, making deep investments, something as simple as changing building codes for not just providing heaters for government subsidized housing, but also AC. We're in a different space now with climate change. So there's lots of work to do here, but know that we're committed. So I want to thank you again, Senator Becker, Majority Leader Hertzberg. It's great to see you again, and I look forward to our work together.
All right, thank you so much. If Senator Hertzberg can stay, we'll stay for a few more minutes. We still have most folks with us. I want to mention a couple of things. One, a lot of people ask, you know, what can I do? It's enough that I'll make the subject of our next blog post, because there's a lot of great resources here locally through Menlo Spark, Rewiring America, through drawdown.org or switchasun.org. So we'll put those, maybe a few of those in the chat if we can, but otherwise look for a future blog post on that. And again, it's the leadership at the city level and county level that helps us as well at the state level. Menlo Park, I'm proud, was the first city to do all electric new construction. And then now we've had many cities, including San Jose and Oakland regionally, do that. And that helps us all at the state level. So to Mark's point about moving faster, we've been reducing our emissions about 1% a year. But to get our 2030 goal and then ultimately 2045, we're gonna have to reduce our emissions 4% a year. So if we do 4 times as much and do that for 25 straight years. So that's really what we're all thinking about, is how do we move faster in each area of the economy, in transportation, as we talked a lot about already today. And Senator Hertzberg said that's going to require, and Sven's point and others, that's going to require making this available to everyone. It can't just be wealthy people driving electric vehicles. We have to make this available to everyone and encourage adoption and enable adoption really throughout the state. It's going to require work in the building sector. It's going to require our work on our electricity grid as we double or triple our electricity use over the next coming decades as we decarbonize everything. And it's going to require industrial, all of these pieces. And again, that's why I think as Senator Hertzberg said, and you've seen this, you've been part of this yourself, both as an entrepreneur and now back as a policymaker. It's going to require innovation in all of those areas. In terms of,
and can I just add something,
sure,
Senator?
Please.
You know, Tony Atkins has, as you know, put together a group and is really making this a big priority in terms of what to do, a sense of urgency, a sense of impactfulness, exactly what you say, the broader issues. I think you're going to see a pretty significant package among all of us working together in a pretty urgent manner to really do some big stuff. And you know, the only thing I want to say, like, I love what you're doing in cement. I think it's fantastic. The numbers of cement is huge. I think the carbon capture in cement is huge. I love that stuff. I love the cross-border stuff. I think it's really elegant thinking. I think we got to really do big stuff with respect to methane gas, which is 10 times, 100 times worse than CO2. And we now know there's technologies, feedstock you can give to cows that dramatically reduce those numbers by 80%. We know that green hydrogen, well, I love the idea of green hydrogen, just to throw it out there. I've talked to a number of people because I use green hydrogen in both of my solar factories, one in Wales and one in LA. You literally use electrolysis. You take the solar electrons created by the photovoltaic cell, you split the molecules, you create water, when you create oxygen, you get a little bit of water, and you take the water and you create hydrogen, and that hydrogen can create jobs. I think one of the big factors here is we look at the series of issues as part of equity, meaning make sure this stuff's available, but also the notion of trying to create jobs, as many jobs as you can, and make us a job center, because we can't just keep putting people out of work. That doesn't work. But I just wanted to interrupt you, Senator, to basically let you know that this is a priority for the Pro Tem in terms of the caucus. She has dispatched us, and we are all excited to work.
That is, yeah, fantastic. No, that was a perfect piece of that. And, you know, I mentioned a little bit earlier on hydrogen. The DOE just had DOE, when I was working with DOE, they had the Sunshot Initiative to get solar to $1 a watt. And I think solar is now about 50 cents a watt. You probably know that's not even better. And DOE also now has the hydrogen shot to get green hydrogen to $1 a kilogram. And so a similar kind of initiative. And again, that's I think one of the ways we can play a role in California, right? We are the leaders. We bring down the costs of these technologies for everyone else. And I think that's an important piece of this. And I think, do you have any final comments? I mean, I think it's really, the technology, as you've seen, has matured so much. It's really now about political will for us to step forward and really kind of create those frameworks here and to encourage that kind of progress this year. Were there any other last things that you're bringing back from COP, things you saw? You mentioned sustainable aviation fuel. I know there was a great panel there as well. And any other things that you're taking back here that's going to influence you in the next year?
Well, I think, can you hear me? Am I voice on? Yeah. Well, I mean, I think what Senator Gonzalez talked about, the idea of the skills passport, of really figuring out to make those jobs work, because we can't be throwing people out of work. We also talked about, all the ability of here you have Scotland. We were in Portugal, a couple of weeks before that, and they have this offshore wind, which I think is extraordinary, ups. But then you have all those wells. So you've got all these wells that you can use to store carbon capture. And carbon capture just doesn't come from fossil fuels. You can carbon capture out of the air. There's all sorts of new technologies that we saw on carbon capture, just like you're talking about carbon capture in cement and other ways. But no, I saw a lot of technologies. Part of the reason I love to go to these kinds of things is, yes, the relationship with the governments. Yes, the subnationals, excited cities, excited That's where the work really hits the road, rubber hits the road. But also the various companies that are out there with cutting edge ideas that are critically important to the development of this stuff. So they were there too and saw a ton of them. And I think that there's real opportunities. The challenge, of course, for us is we've always got this thing in government, we can't favor this group, we can't favor this group. And to my sense is we are in an urgent situation. We got to just find the best, the brightest, the fastest, and go for it. And we have plenty of dough to make it work. So let's invest and really make this an inflection point.
Yeah, I think just the last thought, because you mentioned carbon removal. So Climeworks, some people have heard about, that's direct air capture, and again, very separate from the carbon capture, which is really, capturing what's emitted. This is just drawing down from the atmosphere. And
that's right.
Those technologies are still very, very early. But again, we can play a role there too in bringing down the cost. And I was heartened to see at COP, the Biden administration made a commitment there that you and I talked about. I met with Jennifer Wilcox, who's now at DOE, was at Stanford for 8 years. And there's real commitment. Senator Granholm talked about this to buy down the cost of carbon removal as well, because even if we stop polluting today, we're still going to have to remove carbon from the atmosphere. So
there's 51 billion metric tons of carbon in the atmosphere. If human activity stopped every single molecule of carbon emission today, as you correctly note, we would absolutely have to continue to find a creative way to remove carbon out of the atmosphere if we're going to stop this climate change. So, we all talk about 1.5 degrees and we talk about meeting these goals. That ain't even close to where we got to go. That's why this carbon capture stuff, which has nothing to do with fossil fuel. Reykjavik's got a big plan. We're going to go there and see that. You should come with us, Josh. The folks from CFI have done that. Mr. Hansen has done that already. We're going to go. A number of us want to go to Reykjavik to take a look at that technology.
Well, thank you, everyone. Someone says, how do I purchase carbon neutral cement? And the goal, the framework that we built is to enable it to be built. But there are technologies. One of the X Prize winners at the last X Prize was led by Gaurav Sant at UCLA, and he leads the new building materials initiative at UCLA. So I encourage you checking out his work and the work being done at UCLA. And there's a number of companies that are working on that. So as we wrap up, again, I just want to say we got hundreds of questions in advance, hundreds of questions as we went, and it just shows the commitment around this. And I think what you're hearing here is our commitment. We know that California has been a leader, done amazing things, but we have to move faster as a state, and we have to be really the model for the rest of the world and create the hope for the rest of the world in all of these areas, again, in buildings, in transportation, in electricity, in industrial. And I just want to thank all of you for joining here with us. I want to thank Majority Leader Hertzberg for joining, and our rest of our guests, Senator Gonzalez, and to both Shutta and Amy as well, who were terrific. Thank you. I really appreciate it.